Going somewhere, Engineer Murlock? His voice was ice cold as the guards seized her roughly. We have much to discuss. The door slammed shut, sealing her in with the very butchers she had just unmasked. Murlock's hearts hammered as she realized billions of lives now depended on her. One alien alone against the might of a species willing to rip the galaxy apart for its own gain. The human's most terrible secret was finally out, and she was trapped at the epicenter of a conflict that could exterminate her entire race. Murlock trembled as Commander Jenkins circled her like a predator, his eyes glinting with malice. Did you really think your little investigation would go unnoticed? He sneered. We've been watching you, Murlock. Every keystroke, every transmission. Murlock's mind reeled, desperation clawing at her throat. She had to find a way out to warn her people. Swallowing hard, she forced herself to meet Jenkins's gaze. I'll do it. I'll help you. As Murlock rubbed her bruised wrists, Jenkins led her through the bowels of the ship to a hidden lab. Inside, a gaunt, pale man with piercing eyes looked up from a glowing console. Ah, our new recruit, he said, his voice like silk sliding over steel. I am Dr. Von Thorn, the architect of our great endeavor. Thorn gestured to a restrained Zenari, writhing against his bonds, eyes wide with terror. With a press of a button, the alien went still, his expression blank. Observe, Thorn said, the power to control the very will of our enemies. This is the key to our victory, Jenkins said, clapping Murlock on the shoulder. With this technology, the aliens will be nothing more than our obedient slaves. As Murlock worked alongside Singh, her mind raced. She had to find a way to sabotage the plan, to get a warning out. Subtly, she began to introduce errors into the navigation code, tiny discrepancies that would throw the fleet off course. She also managed to copy Thorn's schematics, her heart pounding as she slipped the data chip into her pocket. If she could just find a way to transmit the information. But Singh was watching her like a hawk. Murlock could feel the lieutenant's suspicion growing with every passing moment. It all came to a head when Murlock was suddenly summoned to the bridge. As she walked the long, empty corridors, the weight of billions of lives pressed down on her. She fingered the data chip, hidden in her clenched fist. The doors to the bridge loomed before her, a maw ready to swallow her whole. Murlock knew she was walking into the lion's den. If her deception was discovered, she was dead. But if she failed, her entire species would pay the price. As Murlock approached the bridge, her heart pounded in her chest, the stolen data chip hidden within her cybernetic arm, feeling like a lead weight. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing the impassive faces of Commander Jenkins and Dr. Thorn. Lieutenant Singh stood off to the side, her eyes darting nervously between Murlock and her superiors. Engineer Murlock, Jenkins said, his voice deceptively calm. We have some concerns about your recent activities. Murlock forced herself to meet his gaze, her mind racing. I've been running diagnostics on the navigation systems, Commander. There were some anomalies, likely due to software glitches. I can provide a full report. Enough, Thorn cut in, his eyes narrowing. Your story is flimsy at best. I believe a session with my device will ensure your loyalty and adherence to our cause. Murlock's blood ran cold. She couldn't let them access her thoughts, not with the knowledge she now possessed. Using your device on me would violate the Alliance Treaty, she argued, her voice steady despite her fear. It could raise suspicions among my people. In the chaos, Murlock seized her chance. She slipped away, sprinting through the corridors towards the hangar bay. Her hearts hammered in her chest as she ran, praying that she could find a way off the ship before Jenkins and Thorn realized she was gone. She burst into the hangar only to skid to a halt at the sight of a group of armed humans. Their leader, a battle-hardened woman with steely eyes, stepped forward. I'm Major Kira Voss, she said. We're not your enemy. Murlock eyed them warily. Who are you? We're a group of humans who oppose the war conspiracy. We've been gathering evidence, sabotaging key systems. Voss extended a hand. Join us. Your knowledge could be invaluable. Voss nodded grimly. It won't be easy. Jenkins and Thorn will be searching for you. At last, they reached the computer core, only to find it heavily guarded by Jenkins's elite troops. Plasma fire filled the air as the rebels fought desperately to buy Murlock time. She darted forward, her fingers flying over the console as she uploaded the virus. Just as the progress bar neared completion, a cold voice filled the room. "Step away from the console." Murloc turned to see Thorn, a mind control device in his hand. "Surrender," he demanded, "or I'll use this on your rebel friends." Voss lunged forward, tackling Thorn and sending the device skittering across the floor. Murloc slammed her hand down on the console, the virus uploading with a final beep. Across the fleet, mind control devices sparked and failed, the puppeteered aliens blinking in confusion as they regained control of their thoughts. Realization and outrage spread like wildfire as the horrifying truth was laid bare. But even as the rebels and Zanari began to take control of the fleet, Murloc knew their fight was just getting started. The fragile trust between their species had been shattered, the specter of war looming on the horizon. She exchanged a glance with Voss, a silent understanding passing between them. They had won the battle, but the true struggle was just beginning. Together they would have to race against time to prevent the galaxy from descending into chaos, unraveling the sinister threads of Project Dominion before it was too late. The victory was short-lived. As Murloc and Voss caught their breath, alarms blared throughout the ship. Urgent reports flooded in from across the fleet. Jenkins's loyalists were mobilizing. "They're converging on the engineering deck," a rebel technician announced, her fingers flying over a console. "At least 50 heavily armed troops." Voss's eyes hardened. "We can't let them take control of the ship's systems. Murloc, I need your expertise. You know these vessels better than anyone." They assembled a strike team, a mix of human rebels and newly freed Zanari. Murloc led them through narrow conduits and cramped access tunnels, the heat of the engines pressing in around them. As they neared the engineering deck, the sounds of battle echoed through the ship. Plasma bolts sizzled past, leaving scorch marks on the bulkheads. Murloc peered around a corner, spotting a group of Jenkins' troops pinning down a handful of rebels. "There," she hissed, pointing to a control panel. "That activates the emergency force fields. If we can reach it—" A deafening explosion rocked the ship, nearly throwing them off their feet. When the smoke cleared, Murloc saw a figure striding through the chaos, Captain Ramirez, Jenkins' right hand. He hefted a weapon unlike anything Murloc had ever seen, sleek and pulsing with energy. "Surrender now," Ramirez bellowed, "or face the full might of humanity's latest advancements." The weapon discharged, unleashing a wave of searing plasma that melted through cover like butter. Murloc barely avoided the blast, the heat singing her scales. They retreated, regrouping in a side corridor. Murloc's mind raced, searching for a solution. "The force fields," she said suddenly. "If we can activate them from here, we can cut off Ramirez and his troops." Working feverishly, Murloc accessed the ship's systems through an auxiliary terminal. Lines of code flashed across the screen as she bypassed security protocols. With a triumphant cry, she activated the force fields. The sounds of battle cut off abruptly as shimmering energy barriers sprang to life. Ramirez and his soldiers found themselves trapped, separated from the vital engineering systems. But even as they secured the engineering deck and escorted the captured loyalists to the brig, a new threat emerged. Murloc's attention was drawn to a flashing alert on a nearby console. "No," she breathed, her blood running cold. "Jenkins, he's escaping." She brought up the sensor readings, revealing a stealth ship detaching from the main fleet. Murloc knew with sickening certainty that Jenkins and Thorn were aboard, along with the secrets of Project Dominion. "Major Voss," Murloc called urgently, "we have to stop them. If they get away—" Within minutes, they were strapped into sleek interceptors, streaking out into the void of space. Murloc's alien physiology gave her an edge, allowing her to withstand the crushing G-forces as they pursued Jenkins's cloaked vessel. The chase led them into a treacherous asteroid field. Murloc's hands flew over the controls, her enhanced reflexes allowing her to weave between the massive rocks with unnatural precision. "There!" she called out, her sensors picking up a faint energy signature. "I've found a way to penetrate their cloak." She transmitted the data to Voss and the other pilots. Coordinating their attacks, they managed to disable Jenkins's ship, their precise shots crippling its engines and defensive systems. As Voss's squadron moved in to capture the vessel with tractor beams, Murlock allowed herself a moment of relief. The immediate threat was neutralized, Jenkins and his conspirators in custody. "Several ships have gone dark," a technician announced, her voice tight with concern. "We've lost all communication and control." Voss's face hardened. "Could be a virus or sabotage. We need to get eyes on those vessels." Murlock nodded grimly. "I'll lead a team to board them manually. We can't risk losing more of the fleet." Within minutes, Murlock found herself suited up and stepping onto the airlock of one of the unresponsive ships. The silence that greeted her was eerie, broken only by the soft hiss of her respirator and the measured footsteps of her team. As they moved deeper into the vessel, a nauseating stench assaulted Murlock's olfactory sensors. She rounded a corner and froze, her hearts clenching in horror at the sight before her. Rows of makeshift cells lined the corridor, filled with cowering aliens of various species. Many bore grotesque mutations, misshapen limbs, pulsating growths, and features warped beyond recognition. "By the void," Voss breathed, her face pale beneath her helmet. "What did Thorn do to them?" Murlock's shock quickly gave way to rage. She keyed her comm, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. "We need medical teams here immediately. And bring Thorn. I want answers." As Dr. Lexa Niall and her elite medical unit arrived to tend to the victims, Murlock confronted the captive Thorn. The human scientist's eyes gleamed with a mixture of pride and disdain. "You call this progress?" Murlock hissed, gesturing to the horrific scenes around them. "Murlock, we've got a problem." The Major's voice was strained. "Thorn wasn't just working on biological weapons. We found evidence of a neural pathogen targeting alien brain functions, and it's already loaded on shuttles, ready for deployment." Murlock's blood ran cold. She grabbed Thorn by the collar, slamming him against the bulkhead. "Where are those shuttles?" she demanded. Murlock released him with a snarl of frustration. There was no time to waste. She raced to the bridge, coordinating with Voss to track down the deadly shuttles. What followed was a frantic chase through treacherous space. Murlock's piloting skills were pushed to their limits as she wove through asteroid fields and navigated orbital gateways. Plasma bolts lit up the void as they engaged the renegade craft. "Two down, one to go," Voss called out as another shuttle erupted in a brilliant explosion. Murlock gritted her teeth, pushing her engines to the red line. The final shuttle loomed ahead, mere moments from entering a jump point that would take it beyond their reach. With a desperate maneuver, Murlock brought her ship alongside the shuttle. She fired a precise burst, shearing off its drive nacelle. The craft spun wildly, its trajectory altered just enough to miss the jump point. As Voss's team moved in to secure the disabled shuttle, Murlock allowed herself a moment of relief. But the victory was short-lived. "Incoming transmission," her co-pilot announced. It's Jenkins." The rogue commander's face appeared on the console, his eyes burning with fanatical willpower. "This isn't over," he snarled. "We have more weapons, more resources. The war will continue, with or without your cooperation." She turned to Voss, who had joined her on the bridge. "We need to find them before they can regroup. Any leads?" Murlock's gaze drifted to the viewport, where the battered fleet hung in the star-studded void. The enormity of the betrayal she had witnessed greatly troubled upon her. As they set course for the rebel base, Murlock couldn't shake the nagging doubt that gnawed at her. After everything she had seen, could there truly be any hope for lasting peace between their species? "We need to move fast," Murlock said. "Every moment we delay gives Jenkins more time to prepare." Voss nodded grimly. "Agreed. I've already begun assembling our strike force. We're combining our best human operatives with Zenari warriors. It's time to see what we can truly accomplish together." As they finalized their assault plans, Dr. Jet Niall's voice crackled over the comm. "Murlock, I think we've made a breakthrough. We've isolated in Thorn's bioweapons. It's not much, but it might give us an edge." "Send everything you have," Murlock replied. "We'll need every advantage we can get." Hours later, Murlock found herself strapped into a drop pod, surrounded by a mix of human and Zenari soldiers. The ship shuddered as it unleashed a barrage of precision strikes against the outpost's defenses. "Breach in 30 seconds, the pilot's voice rang out. Murloc closed her eyes, steadying her breathing. When they snapped open again, they blazed with fierce willpower. The pod slammed into the outpost with bone-jarring force. Murloc was first out, her plasma rifle at the ready, the air filled with the sizzle of energy weapons and the acrid stench of ozone. They pushed forward, securing room after room. But as they penetrated deeper into the facility, they encountered horrors beyond imagination. Mutated aliens, warped into living weapons, lurched from the shadows. A creature with acid for blood charged at Murloc, its tentacles lashing out. She ducked, feeling the air sizzle where the appendages passed overhead. With preternatural speed, she spun and fired, her shot finding a weak point in the monstrosity's twisted form. "Watch out!" Voss shouted, tackling a Zanari warrior out of the path of a beast that breathed clouds of corrosive spores. Murloc's mind raced, correlating the nightmarish creations with the data Dr. Niall had provided. "Aim for the joints," she called out. "Their mutations have left structural weaknesses." The tide of battle shifted as her allies adapted, exploiting the monstrosity's vulnerabilities. They fought their way through laboratories filled with half-formed abominations and storage chambers packed with bioweapon canisters. As they neared the heart of the facility, a familiar figure emerged from the chaos. Jenkins, his eyes burning with fanatic intensity, led a final desperate counterattack. "You're too late," he snarled, raising a weapon that pulsed with sickly energy. "Humanity will be cleansed of the alien taint, one way or another." She reached for a vial at her belt, a synthesized compound based on Dr. Niall's research. As Jenkins's troops engaged her allies, Murloc closed the distance between them. Jenkins fired, the energy blast searing past Murloc's scales. She pushed through the pain, hurling the vial at his feet. It shattered, releasing a cloud of neurotoxin specifically tailored to target the pathogen coursing through Jenkins's veins. "It's over, Jenkins," Murloc said, her voice hard. But the fallen leader's lips twisted into a defiant sneer. "Is it? My loyal followers have already primed our remaining weapons to detonate. This entire sector will burn in cleansing fire." "Voss," she shouted, "I need your team to secure the remaining loyalists. I have to shut this down." Murloc's mind became a whirlwind of calculations and rapid-fire decisions. She navigated a labyrinth of fail-safes and booby traps, each misstep potentially spelling doom for millions. Sweat beaded on her scales as she disarmed payload after payload. The final warhead loomed before her, its countdown ticking away the seconds with merciless precision. The timer froze with a mere 2 seconds remaining. Murloc sagged against the console, exhaustion washing over her. As the adrenaline faded, she became acutely aware of the carnage surrounding her. The twisted bodies of Jenkins' creations lay strewn about, a testament to the depths of his madness. She watched as Voss and her team led the last of the human supremacists away in restraints. Jenkins himself, still paralyzed by the neurotoxin, glared at her with impotent rage as he was carried past. Murloc's gaze drifted to a view screen showing the fleet in orbit. The ships hung there, a fragile assembly of metal and hope against the vastness of space. She thought of the countless souls aboard, human and alien alike, who had nearly been wiped out by one man's hatred. "Report!" she barked, eyes scanning the holographic displays. Voss's face was grim. "Multiple human ships have broken formation. They're making a run for it." Murloc's heart sank as she watched the rogue vessels accelerate away from the fleet. Their trajectories were unmistakable. They were heading straight for Zanari colony worlds. "How many?" she demanded. "At least 6 cruisers and a dozen smaller craft," Voss replied, "all heavily armed." Niall nodded, her fingers already flying over unseen controls. "I'm compiling everything we've learned from Thorne's research. It's not perfect, but it's a start." "Evasive maneuvers!" Murloc shouted as a volley of missiles streaked towards them. She yanked the controls, the ship shuddering as it narrowly avoided destruction. A crackle of static, then Voss's voice. "Murloc, we've got a situation. Captain Ayers just unleashed some kind of pathogen against the Zanari cruiser Nostkal. We're looking at hundreds dead already. Rage boiled through Murlock's veins. She keyed her comm, voice cold with fury. Send me Air's coordinates, now. The human captain sneered, raising a strange pulsating weapon. You're too late, alien. Your kind will be purged from this galaxy. Murlock didn't waste breath on a response. She lunged forward, her reflexes enhanced by adrenaline. Ayers fired, the weapon discharging a cloud of sickly green mist. Murlock twisted, feeling it sear across her scales, but pressed on. They grappled, Murlock's superior strength giving her the edge. With a final, vicious blow, she sent Ayers crashing to the deck, unconscious. Secure him, she ordered her team, and start scanning the ship's systems. I want to know exactly what he was planning. The answer came all too quickly. A junior officer's face paled as he called out, Commander, there's an active launch sequence. Planet-killer missiles targeting the Zanari homeworld. 17 minutes until they reach the outer defense grid, came the response. Murlock gritted her teeth. Not nearly enough time to evacuate a planet. Their only hope was to somehow deactivate the missiles mid-flight. Her antenna twitched with strain as she navigated through treacherous code. Fail-safes and booby traps threatened to lock her out at every turn. Sweat beaded on her scales as the minutes ticked away. 5 minutes to impact, someone shouted. Outer defense grid breached. With a final, desperate command sequence, Murlock broke through. The missile control interface flashed green. She had access. Her fingers flew in a blur, inputting the deactivation codes. One by one, the missile icons on the display winked out. Time seemed to slow. Murlock's hearts pounded in her ears as she input the final deactivation code. The missile icon vanished. For a moment, silence reigned on the bridge. Then a cheer erupted from the Zanari crew members. Murlock sagged against the console, exhaustion washing over her. She allowed herself a brief moment of relief before straightening. There was still work to be done. Unidentified ships were appearing on long-range scanners, dozens of them converging from all sectors. Voss's hologram flickered to life, his expression grim. Murlock, we've got a problem. Those distress beacons Jenkins' people activated before we captured them? They just brought reinforcements. Murlock's antenna drooped as she processed the implications. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. What are we dealing with? She asked, steeling herself for the answer. Voss's reply chilled her to the core. It's Contingency Protocol Zulu. The highest-ranking human commanders are coming, and they're bringing everything they've got. Murlock's antenna twitched as she processed Voss's grim report. The incoming human armada dwarfed their already battered fleet. How long until they reach us? She asked, her scales tensing. 30 minutes, maybe less, Voss replied, his hologram flickering. They're pushing their engines hard. A distant rumble shook the ship as another volley of long-range fire impacted their shields. Murlock gripped the command console, her eyes scanning tactical displays. Voss, what do we know about their command structure? As if on cue, a harsh voice crackled over the comms. Attention alien aggressors and human traitors. This is Admiral Kruger. You will surrender immediately or face total annihilation. Murlock's scales bristled at the ultimatum. She opened her mouth to respond, but Voss cut in. Wait, he said, his eyes gleaming. I have an idea. In rapid-fire Zanari, Voss outlined his plan. Murlock's antenna perked up as she grasped the audacity of it. It's risky, she said, but it might be our only shot. Minutes later, Murlock found herself aboard the captured stealth ship, her claws flying over unfamiliar controls. She'd had only moments to familiarize herself with the vessel's systems before launching their daring plan. Transmitting now, she reported, sending out the carefully crafted false intel, suggesting Jenkins and his loyalists had seized control of the fleet. Through the viewscreen, Murlock watched Kruger's vanguard approach. Massive human warships overflowing with weaponry filled her field of vision. Her heart raced as she worked to disable the stealth ship's warp drive, leaving it a tempting target. All teams, prepare to abandon ship, Voss's voice crackled over the comm. Shuttles are standing by. Murlock felt the deck shudder beneath her feet as Kruger's ships locked on. She sprinted for the escape pod, her scaled fingers dancing across the launch controls. The pod erupted from the stealth ship's hull just as a barrage of energy weapons tore into the vessel. Murloc watched through the tiny viewport as the decoy erupted in a brilliant explosion. Her pod streaked through the debris field, dodging twisted shards of metal and ice. Ahead, she saw the rebel fleet lying in wait, their ships powered down to avoid detection. As Kruger's forces pushed deeper into the field, searching for survivors, Murloc's antenna quivered in anticipation. She keyed her comm. "Now! All ships, attack pattern Delta!" she shouted as she burst onto the command deck. "Hit them while they're disoriented!" The bridge erupted in cheers as both vessels went dark, drifting helplessly. But their victory was short-lived. Kruger's remaining ships were regrouping, their superior numbers still a deadly threat. "Commander," Dr. Niall's voice cut through the din. "I've done it. The virus is ready." Murloc's hearts leapt. "Upload it to our stealth drones. We need to hit Kruger's flagship." Murloc allowed herself a moment of relief before keying the long-range comm. "Admiral Kruger, this is Commander Murloc. Your ships are disabled, and you are outnumbered. Surrender now, and we can end this without further bloodshed." For a long moment, there was only static. Then Kruger's voice filled with almost unchecked rage. "You win this round, alien, but mark my words, this isn't over." As the human ships powered down their remaining systems in surrender, Murloc's antenna drooped with exhaustion. They had averted disaster, but at what cost? Her moment of reflection was shattered by a priority alert. She turned to the communications officer, dread building in her stomach. Murloc's antenna twitched as she absorbed the grim intel. The tactical display before her painted a nightmarish picture, a sea of red icons representing the incoming human armada. 3,000 ships, Voss muttered, his hologram flickering. "And that's just what we can detect." Dr. Niall's voice crackled over the comm, thick with urgency. "Commander, I've decrypted more of the Omega Order. It's worse than we thought." Murloc's scales prickled. "Explain." The bridge fell silent. Murloc's claws dug into the command console as the full weight of the situation crashed down upon her. "We need to move," she declared, her voice cutting through the tension. "Now!" Days blurred together in a haze of tactical decisions and near misses. Sleep became a luxury Murloc could ill afford. Her scales were dull with fatigue, but she pushed on. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A long-range scout, more daring than most, had stumbled upon the Halston cluster. "It's a maze of asteroids and spatial anomalies," the scout reported, his voice crackling with interference. "But it might be defensible." Murloc studied the data, her mind racing. It was a risk, but they were out of options. The plan came together quickly. The fleet would split, with the faster ships acting as decoys to draw off the human pursuers. Murloc found herself in command of one such group, a ragtag collection of battered cruisers and transports. "Keep them safe," Voss said as they prepared to part ways. His hologram reached out, hand hovering near Murloc's shoulder in a gesture of solidarity. The first skirmish came swiftly. Human ships dropped out of warp, weapons blazing. Murloc's antenna quivered as she called out maneuvers, her mind a whirlwind of calculations and split-second decisions. They emerged victorious, but at a cost. 2 of her ships were crippled, their hulls venting atmosphere. As they limped away from the battle site, Murloc knew it was only the beginning. System after system blurred past as they led the human splinter force on a deadly chase. Murloc pushed her tactical skills to the limit, using every trick and stratagem she'd ever learned. "All ships, prepare for warp lane plunge," she ordered, her voice steady despite the risk. "On my mark. Now!" They plunged into the maelstrom. Murloc's ship bucked and shuddered as it navigated the unpredictable currents of the anomaly field. Through the view screen, she watched a pursuing cruiser get torn apart by a sudden surge of dark matter. "Shields at 30%, her tactical officer reported. "We can't take much more of this." Murloc's mind raced. Then she saw it, a patch of swirling, icy vapor. "All ships, follow my lead," she commanded. "We're going dark." They plunged into the frigid nebula, their systems powering down to bare minimums. Murloc held her breath, watching the sensor readouts as the remaining human ships drew closer. The enemy strike team burst from warp, weapons primed. In that instant, Murloc sprang her trap. As the last enemy ship winked out of existence, Murloc allowed herself a moment of relief. But it was short-lived. The real battle was yet to come. Voss gathered the Alliance leadership, his hologram grave. "We can't win a war of attrition," he said bluntly. "Our only hope is to strike at the heart of the human command structure before the full armada arrives." All eyes turned to Murloc. She straightened, her scales glinting in the dim light of the command center. As she strode towards the hangar bay, Murloc knew the fate of entire species rested on her shoulders. But failure wasn't an option, not when the entire galaxy hung in the balance. Murloc's antenna twitched as she studied the incoming transmissions. Her eyes narrowed, focusing on a particular set of data points. "There," she said, gesturing to the tactical display. "Admiral Franklin Rhodes. He's coordinating the entire Omega Order from Luna." Voss leaned in, his hologram flickering. "The Lunar Command Bunker? Impossible to breach." "Not impossible," Murloc countered, her scales glinting in the dim light. "Just highly improbable." "I'll go," Murloc said simply. "Who's with me?" Hours later, Murloc found herself at the helm of a captured stealth scout ship, a hand-picked team of operatives at her back. The ship vibrated beneath her as she initiated a series of rapid micro-jumps, dancing between the spiral arms of the Milky Way. "Disabling tracking beacons," her navigation officer reported. "We're dark." "Hold on," she growled, plunging the ship into a series of wild maneuvers. They weaved through barrages of missiles, their hull screaming as it grazed the outer barrier of a minefield. Murloc's heart raced as she pushed the ship to its limits, relying on instinct as much as skill. With a bone-jarring thud, they touched down on the far side of Earth's moon. Murloc led her team out onto the dusty surface, their specialized suits allowing them to move swiftly across the lunar landscape. Deep within the facility, they found themselves on a catwalk overlooking a massive production floor. Murloc's blood ran cold at the sight. Endless lines of sleek warships rolled off automated assembly lines. Robotic hunter-killers swarmed in holding pens, their sensors sweeping for targets. And at the far end, sealed vats bubbled with sickly green liquid, bioweapons waiting to be unleashed. As data streamed into their devices, alarms suddenly blared. Cyborg enforcers poured into the chamber, weapons raised. "Intruders! Terminate with extreme prejudice!" "We're pinned down!" her tactical officer shouted over the din of battle. Just then the facility shook. A familiar voice crackled over Murloc's comm. "Need a lift?" Major Voss's gunship hovered outside a shattered view screen, its weapons blazing. Murloc's team made a mad dash for the extraction point, leaping aboard as cyborg reinforcements closed in. "Go!" Murloc shouted as she cleared the hatch. They punched through, their engines screaming as they prepared to jump. Just as they activated their warp drive, Murloc noticed a flashing alert on her datapad. They emerged in Allied space, victorious but wary. Murloc's elation turned to dread as she examined the stolen intel. "It's a trap," she breathed. "The data, it's carrying a virus." Before she could warn the fleet, their defenses began to fail. Alarms blared across every ship as systems crashed. Hunter-killer drones swarmed their formation. Missiles streaked through space, finding targets with unerring accuracy. Ship after ship winked out of existence, overwhelmed by the relentless assault. Murloc's flagship shuddered as a breach pod slammed into its hull. In that moment of desperation, clarity struck. She saw the pattern in the virus's code, a flaw she could exploit. Her claws flew over the console, reprogramming the malicious software. With a silent prayer, she unleashed it back upon Rhodes's ships. As the immediate threat subsided, Murloc studied the complete Omega Order files. Her heart sank as the true scope of Rhodes's plan became clear. This wasn't just about conquest. It was annihilation on a galactic scale. She laid out her audacious plan, antenna twitching, as she detailed the infiltration of the Lunar Command Complex. Dr. Niall, his scales dulled with fatigue, held up a data crystal. Voss's hologram flickered as he assembled the strike team. I have someone who can get us in, he said, gesturing to a grizzled human male. Meet Harkin. Hours later, Murloc found herself clinging to the hull of a stealth shuttle, rocketing through a debris field towards the moon's pockmarked surface. Harkin's voice crackled in her earpiece. 30 seconds to insertion. Get ready to move fast. They touched down in a crater, immediately sprinting for a concealed access hatch. Murloc's hearts raced as Harkin bypassed the security protocols. The team plunged into the dim, winding tunnels of Rhodes's fortress. Motion sensors ahead, Voss whispered, his hologram projecting a 3D map. Cyborg patrol incoming. The central data core loomed before them, a pulsing mass of crystalline processors. Murloc's claws flew over the interface, uploading Niall's virus. Alarms blared. We've been made, Harkin shouted, opening fire on the wave of security drones pouring into the chamber. Get that virus uploaded. It's done, she cried, just as Harkin took a direct hit to the chest. Go, the human operative gasped, tossing her a datapad. I'll hold them off. This is for all of us. Murloc hesitated, but Voss grabbed her arm. We have to move. Now! They raced through the tunnels, the sounds of battle fading behind them. Suddenly, an inhuman shriek echoed through the complex. Murloc's blood ran cold as she saw it, a roiling mass of bioplasma consuming everything in its path. Erebus, Voss breathed. Rhodes is failsafe. The ship shuddered as they jumped to warp, leaving the Sol system behind. Murloc slumped in her chair, exhaustion washing over her. But there was no time to rest. Status report, she barked, turning to her tactical officer. The virus worked, came the reply. We're detecting massive disruptions in the human fleet's astrogation systems. Niall's team is broadcasting false coordinates now. Murloc watched the tactical display, a fierce satisfaction burning in her chest as human capital ships blinked out of existence, scattered across the cosmos. Weeks, maybe, but not forever. Let's show Rhodes what we're made of, Murloc growled, her claws tightening on the command console. Major Voss's hologram flickered to life beside her. Confirmed. We're detecting massive antimatter signatures. Rhodes is using civilians as living bombs. Murloc's mind raced. The sheer horror of Rhodes's plan threatened to overwhelm her, but she pushed it aside. There would be time for revulsion later. Now, they needed solutions. As Niall's team worked feverishly, Murloc coordinated the defense. Her ships danced through the minefield, their weapons blazing. Energy beams lanced out, striking the incoming transports with surgical precision. They targeted engines and weapon systems, careful to avoid breaching the hulls. A cheer went up across the bridge, but Murloc's relief was short-lived. New contacts appeared on her display, Rhodes's true assault force emerging from the cover of a nearby nebula. Murloc watched as a wing of her fighters sacrificed themselves, using their own hulls as a shield to get the override code through. Their sacrifice saved millions, but the cost... A priority alert flashed on her screen. Murloc's hearts nearly stopped as she saw the massive freighter barreling towards the civilian shelters at the heart of the Halston cluster. Murloc's mind whirled. There had to be a way. Her eyes fell on the readouts from the cluster's quantum anomalies. It's insane, he said, but it just might work. What followed was a blur of activity. Murloc barked orders as her crews cobbled together a makeshift warp array, cannibalizing parts from their own engines. Time seemed to stretch as the freighter drew ever closer to its target. Now, Murloc shouted as the array hummed to life. Murloc allowed herself a moment of fierce satisfaction before turning her attention to Rhodes's second wave. The human ships plowed into the expanding warp field, their antimatter containment systems faltering. All ships, form up, she ordered. Prepare to channel that energy. Wait for it, she growled, her antenna quivering with tension. Wait for it, now! The rebel ships fired as one, their weapons drawing power from the time-dilated antimatter bubble. Space itself seemed to ignite as lances of impossible energy tore through Rhodes's fleet. This isn't over, she said quietly, her eyes locked on that final threat. This isn't over, Murloc said quietly, her eyes locked on the lone blip representing Rhodes's command ship. But even as she spoke, alarms blared across her bridge. "Commander!" her chief engineer shouted. "The warp bubble, it's destabilizing." "How long?" she demanded. Murlock's heart sank as she studied the projections. If the bubble burst, the unleashed energy would obliterate everything within a dozen star systems. She keyed her comm. The hologram flickered to life, Voss's face etched with exhaustion. "We can't sustain this, Murlock. We have to evacuate." "The entire Halston cluster?" Murlock's voice was incredulous. "Impossible." Murlock nodded grimly. "Do it. I'll coordinate from here." As Voss's team began the exodus, Murlock threw herself into the work. Her claws flew over consoles, programming randomized navigation coordinates to scatter the refugees across uncharted systems. "Commander," Dr. Niall's voice crackled over the comm, "I may have a solution." Murlock's mind raced. There had to be a way. Her eyes fell on a data crystal, salvaged from the battle. "Erebus," she breathed. Hours later, Murlock stood before a sealed chamber, watching as technicians carefully reactivated the remains of Rhodes's computer virus. Even damaged, its processing power was staggering. "You're sure about this?" Voss asked, his hologram flickering with concern. "Stark!" Voss snarled. "That treacherous bastard!" Murlock's world narrowed to a pinpoint of clarity. With the last reserves of her willpower, she plunged deeper into Erebus's digital realm. As her physical form began to dissolve, she grappled with the virus mind, buying precious seconds for her team. "Now, Niall!" she screamed, her voice distorting as her body unraveled. "Trigger the implosion!" In the stunned silence that followed, Voss stared at the empty chamber where Murlock had stood. His fists clenched as he turned to face the shaken crew. "We cannot let her death be in vain," Voss said, his voice heavy. "Murlock believed in peace, in breaking this cycle of—" "Peace," Admiral Sarika interrupted, mandibles clicking in agitation. "While human colonies mobilize against us, your sentiment blinds you to reality, Major." The Zenari Admiral's claws danced across a data pad, projecting images of fortified human outposts. "General Marcus Cole rallies his forces even now. We must strike first." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Dr. Niall stepped forward, antenna twitching nervously. "Perhaps negotiations—" "Silence!" Sarika roared. "The time for words has passed." "This is Theron Vex," a hushed voice crackled through static. "Major, it's worse than we thought. Cole is a distraction. The real threat is Admiral Stark." Voss as Vex outlined Stark's genocidal plan. The fanatical humans' cloaked fleet was already en route to the defenseless Zenari core worlds. "Transmitting target coordinates now," Vex said, "but our forces are too scattered. We can't—" The transmission cut off abruptly. Voss stared at the data, mind racing. Their window of opportunity was rapidly closing. He strode back to the arguing officials, thumping his hand on the central holotable. The room fell silent. "There's no time," Voss countered. He turned, locking eyes with a young human officer. "Lieutenant Decker, I need you." "We have one shot at this," Voss said. "Two ships, heavily modified. We'll use Murlock's quantum beacon tech to trigger Stark's antimatter stockpiles. With luck, we can create a warp bubble to trap his entire invasion force." Sarika's mandibles worked furiously. "This is madness. The gravitational distortions alone could—" "It's our only option," Voss cut her off. He nodded to Decker. "Assemble your team. We leave in 10 minutes. Voss met her gaze, his expression grim. "Probably, but if we fail, there won't be anything left to come back to anyway." The hangar doors yawned open, revealing the star-studded void. As final system checks completed, Voss keyed the comms. "All units, this is Major Voss. Stark's fleet is inbound to Zenari Prime. We're going to stop them or die trying. May whatever gods you believe in have mercy on us all." Decker gritted her teeth, making minute adjustments to their trajectory. The ship shuddered as they skimmed the edge of a dense radiation belt, alarms blaring. As they closed in on the enemy fleet, Voss activated their camouflage drones. The small devices swarmed out, projecting a convincing holographic minefield. On the tactical display, Decker watched as the enemy vanguard scattered in confusion. "Now," Voss barked. "Remember the plan," Voss said, checking his weapon. "I'll plant the beacon. You run interference." They split up as soon as they breached the hull, Decker laying down covering fire as Voss sprinted for the antimatter stockpiles. The corridors echoed with the whine of energy weapons and the metallic thud of Stark's cybernetic security forces. Decker dove behind a bulkhead, plasma bolts sizzling past her head. She popped up, squeezing off precise bursts that dropped two of the cyborg troopers. "Beacon's armed!" Voss's voice crackled over the comm. "Starting deployment sequence." His transmission cut off abruptly. Decker's blood ran cold as she heard a new voice. Cold, imperious, unmistakably Admiral Stark himself. "I must admit, I'm impressed you made it this far." Stark's voice oozed malevolent amusement. "But your pathetic rebellion ends here." Decker crept forward, staying low. She could see Voss now, hands raised as Stark leveled a sleek pistol at his head. "You don't understand," Stark continued, his cybernetic eye glowing an eerie red. "This isn't about mere conquest. Humanity requires Lebensraum, and the Zenari are an impediment to our manifest destiny. We will cleanse their worlds with purifying fire, ushering in a new era of human ascendancy." As Stark monologued, Decker's fingers found the activation switch for Murlock's final countermeasure. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then pressed it. Voss didn't waste a moment. He lunged for the beacon controls, slamming his palm down on the detonation key. A pulse of blindingly bright energy erupted from the device, washing over the antimatter stockpiles. "Run!" Voss shouted as reality itself began to warp and twist around them. The infiltrator's hull creaked ominously as they fought free of the expanding gravimetric distortion. On the rear view screens, Decker watched as Stark's mighty warships were engulfed one by one, frozen in a moment of perpetual detonation. As the warp bubble stabilized into a parsec-spanning prison of distorted spacetime, Voss keyed the long-range communicator. "This is Major Voss to all rebel forces. Stark's invasion fleet is neutralized. I repeat, Stark's fleet is neutralized." A ragged cheer rose from the comm speakers, but it was cut short by an urgent transmission. "Major, this is Command. We're detecting massive antimatter detonations across 3 systems. Cole's forces are hitting our bases, and civilian targets." Voss's face hardened as the import of those words sank in. He exchanged a grim look with Decker, both of them realizing that their victory had come at a terrible cost. Decker's hands tightened on the controls. The real war, it seemed, was only just beginning. "How bad?" he asked, voice low and taut. Decker's fingers flew across the tactical display, pulling up damage assessments. Her face paled. "It's catastrophic, sir. Cole's antimatter strikes have decimated our forward bases. Civilian casualties are—" She swallowed hard. "They're astronomical." The transmission dissolved into static. Decker nodded, already formulating a plan. "There's a meteor storm approaching Altros IV in 6 hours. We can use it as cover for insertion." The infiltration was harrowing. Their ship bucked and shuddered as it rode the meteor storm's turbulence, heat shields straining against the atmospheric entry. They touched down in a secluded ravine, the landscape around them scarred by orbital bombardment. "Praise the void," Randra breathed as she saw them. "You came." As they loaded the Zenari aboard the captured human lander, proximity alarms shrieked to life. Cole's forces had detected them. The sky above the makeshift landing zone erupted in flames as Voss's fighters engaged Cole's dropships. On the ground, Decker's team exchanged fire with waves of robotic infantry, their metal chassis glinting in the strobing explosions. The lander rocked as a near miss showered them with superheated debris. Decker gritted her teeth, knowing each second increased their chances of annihilation. Suddenly, the comm crackled. "Decker, this is Niall. Transmitting shield modulation now. It's untested, but—" She didn't wait for him to finish, punching in the code sequence. The air around the lander shimmered, and the next barrage of enemy fire deflected in a dazzling light show. With a deafening rumble, the lander lifted off, scattering boulders and debris. They punched through the atmosphere in a hail of laser fire, Cole's hunter-killer drones swarming around them. Voss's fighters swooped in, guns blazing. "Go!" he shouted over the comm. "We'll cover your exit." "People of Zanari, hear me. Cole's crusade will not break us. We are more than our worlds, more than our bodies. We are the undying spirit of a civilization that has weathered 1,000 storms. Rise up, resist. For in our unity lies our strength, and in our strength, our survival." The lander's engines whined as Decker guided it into the Zanari carrier's cavernous hangar bay. Randra's words still echoed through the comm channels, a rallying cry that spread like wildfire across the stars. Voss met them at the airlock, his face etched with relentless drive. "We've got reports coming in from all sectors. Your speech worked, Matriarch. Rebel cells are rising up everywhere." Randra's head crest rippled with a mix of hope and concern. "And Cole's forces?" During one such evacuation run to Caldron Prime, Decker's comm crackled with urgent warnings. "New contacts," her wingman shouted. "Massive energy signatures." The sky above Caldron's ruined spaceport lit up as colossal shapes emerged from hyperspace. Decker's eyes widened as she took in the monstrous forms of Cole's latest weapon. "Juggernauts," she breathed, watching the titanic war machines bristle with cannon batteries. The rebel fighters swarmed around the lumbering behemoths, their weapons barely scratching the paint. Decker dove and rolled, narrowly avoiding a barrage that vaporized 3 of her squad mates in an instant. "We can't punch through those shields," someone yelled over the comm. Decker's cruiser shuddered as a glancing hit from a Juggernaut's main gun tore through its portside armor. Warning klaxons blared as system after system went dark. "It's insane," Decker admitted, "but it might just work." She explained her plan as they raced back to the hangar. Voss nodded grimly. "Do it." Decker's fighters screamed back into Caldron's atmosphere, the jury-rigged warhead clutched in its magnetic clamps. She dove straight for the Juggernauts, which turned their massive gun batteries to track her approach. "Come on, you bastards," Decker muttered. "Take the bait." She released the warhead, watching as its magnetic weight caught the Juggernaut's attention. The titanic war machines pivoted, abandoning their assault on the fleeing transports to give chase. The warhead's casing exploded in a dazzling burst of light. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then reality itself seemed to twist and buckle. A vortex of impossible geometries bloomed outward, engulfing the Juggernauts one by one. Decker watched in awe as the massive war machines froze mid-stride, trapped in a moment of perpetual detonation. She keyed her comm. "Decker to Voss, package delivered." Suddenly, the incoming dreadnoughts' formations disintegrated. They spiraled wildly, weapons firing at random. Decker's comm lit up with a familiar voice. "This is Nile," the scientist announced. "My disruptor virus is working. Cole's command network is in chaos." Seizing the moment, Voss's voice boomed across all channels. "All units, push through. Get those transports clear." Decker fell into formation, providing cover as the ragtag fleet of civilian ships punched through Cole's crumbling blockade. As they jumped to hyperspace, carrying thousands to safety, she allowed herself a moment of fierce pride. Vex, the reptilian intelligence officer, took center stage. "Our deep cover assets have confirmed our worst fears," he hissed. "Cole has consolidated his remaining loyalists around a weapon of unimaginable destructive potential." As Vex outlined the threat posed by Cole's antimatter bomb, Decker felt a chill run down her spine. The stakes, impossibly, had grown even higher. Amidst the chaos, Randra's voice cut through. "I will shepherd our people," the matriarch declared. "Let the Crucible be our final blow against tyranny." The Crucible's command deck thrummed with nervous energy as Voss surveyed the assembled leaders. Nial's antennae twitched erratically as he input the final calculations into the main computer. Voss nodded grimly. "Matriarch, your evacuation status?" Randra's holographic form shimmered. "We've loaded all non-essential personnel. My carrier group stands ready." As the Zanari ships peeled away from the Crucible, alarms blared across the command deck. Lieutenant Decker's voice crackled over the comm. The deck shuddered as the first volley of missiles slammed into the Crucible's shields. Voss gripped the command rail. All batteries, return fire. We just need to hold them off. Outside, space lit up with crisscrossing beams of energy. The Crucible's defenders swarmed to intercept waves of hunter-killer drones that slipped through the barrage. Decker's fighter squadron dove and weaved, their engines screaming as they engaged Cole's vanguard. "Our shields are faltering," an officer shouted over the din of battle. "Another direct hit and—" "Divert all power to structural fields," Voss ordered. He turned to Niall. "How close are we?" The alien's eyes were wide, fixed on his readouts. "The bubble. It's destabilizing faster than predicted. We're approaching critical—" A blinding flash erupted from the heart of the warp bubble. The shock wave slammed into the Crucible with titanic force, shearing off entire sections of the massive structure. Voss was thrown to the deck as klaxons shrieked and emergency force fields snapped into place. "Abandon ship!" he roared, hauling himself to his feet. "All hands to escape pods!" As crew members scrambled for safety, Niall's fingers flew across his console. "Initiating remote severance protocols," he announced. "Each jettisoned segment will amplify the but—" His words were cut off as another tremor rocked the command deck. Through the viewports, Voss watched in awe as chunks of the Crucible broke away, adding their mass to the expanding shock front. Cole's ships, caught in the maelstrom, were torn apart like paper. The pod tumbled end over end, batted by waves of gravimetric distortion. When the turbulence finally subsided, Voss peered through the tiny viewport. Where moments ago 2 mighty fleets had clashed, now only scattered debris drifted in eerie silence. A priority transmission crackled through the pod's comm system. "This is Matriarch Randra to all survivors. We are establishing a rally point at coordinates Theta 97. Make your way to us if you are able." As more pods and shuttles limped towards the Zenari carrier group, the scale of devastation became clear. The Crucible was gone, along with millions of lives. Cole's invasion force lay in ruins, but at a staggering cost. Voss continued, his voice steady despite the exhaustion threatening to overwhelm him. "Dr. Niall, work with the Zenari scientists. We need to understand the full scope of the damage and start planning for long-term relief efforts." As the others filed out to carry out their orders, Voss found himself alone with Matriarch Randra. The Zenari leader's ornate head crest quivered with almost unchecked emotion. Voss nodded, his throat tight. "And now we have to make sure it was worth it." Together, they turned to face the view screen, where the first refugee ships were beginning to dock. Beyond them, countless points of light glimmered in the void, each one a world forever changed by the events of this day. Admiral Corvin, the newly appointed Zenari liaison, stepped forward. His scaled skin glistened under the harsh lights of the command center. "Perhaps now you see the folly of trusting humans," he hissed. Randra's holographic form shimmered as she considered his words. "A formal alliance? After everything that's happened?" "We don't have a choice," Voss pressed. "Cole and Stark are still out there. We need each other to survive." The negotiations that followed were tense, filled with thinly veiled accusations and deep-seated mistrust. Corvin scrutinized every proposal, his reptilian eyes narrowing with suspicion at each human suggestion. Tensions reached a boiling point when alarms blared across the command deck. Lieutenant Decker's voice crackled over the comms. "Sir, we've got multiple hostiles engaging a Zenari medical frigate." Corvin snarled, his clawed hand reaching for his sidearm. "Treachery! I knew we couldn't trust—" "Belay that!" Voss snapped. He leaned over the tactical display, studying the readouts. "Those aren't our ships. Scavengers, taking advantage of the chaos." But the damage was done. Within minutes, human and Zenari task forces faced each other across a volatile no-man's land of space, weapons primed and itching for an excuse to fire. Decker's fighters screamed between the opposing fleets, threading the needle between overlapping fields of fire. He keyed his comm, broadcasting on all frequencies. "This is Lieutenant Decker to all ships. Stand down. We're not enemies here." "Elder Matriarch Randra," he called out, praying his gambit would pay off. "I request an immediate audience. The fate of both our peoples hangs in the balance." For agonizing seconds, there was only silence. Then a tractor beam locked onto Decker's fighter, guiding him into a hangar bay that immediately sealed and depressurized behind him. Hours later, Decker's shuttle emerged from the Zanari flagship. He made a series of daring runs between the still-tense blockades, ferrying messages and counteroffers. Slowly, painfully, a fragile accord took shape. Voss stood at the head of the war room, surveying the uneasy allies gathered before him. Humans and Zanari, former enemies now forced into an alliance of desperation. He took a deep breath. Corbin leaned forward, studying the holographic display of the gaseous anomaly. The rift's storms will shred our ships before we even get close. Not if we jump directly into the heart of it, Decker countered. A precision hyperspace insertion, right on top of them. The plan was audacious, bordering on suicidal. But as the Allied fleet dropped out of hyperspace into the swirling chaos of the Mavera Rift, Voss allowed himself a glimmer of hope. That hope was short-lived. "Perhaps you humans aren't entirely useless in a fight," Corvan grunted, his scales flecked with gore. The tide began to turn as Decker led a daring counterstroke. Reverse engineering Cole's own tactic, they vented the rift's mutagenic gases through the airlocks. The noxious fumes sent Cole's troops into spasms of agony, their armor unable to filter out the contamination. Victory seemed within reach as Voss's forces pushed onto Cole's command platform. Then a cold voice rang out over all frequencies. "Did you really think you could beat me at my own game?" Cole's laughter was chilling. "I've already won." Decker's voice cut through the panic. "Sir, I have an idea. It's insane, but—" "Do it!" Voss shouted. But the triumph was short-lived. Voss felt a sickening lurch as his own ship was caught in the expanding anomaly. Outside the viewports, he could see Allied reinforcements desperately trying to reach them, only to bounce off the impenetrable barrier of warped space. The warp bubble pulsed, reality flickering at its edges. Trapped inside with the remnants of Cole's forces, cut off from the rest of the galaxy, Voss knew their ordeal was just the beginning. Voss gripped the command console, his fist clenched as the warp bubble pulsed around them. The view screens flickered, offering distorted glimpses of Allied ships beyond the impenetrable barrier. "Status report," he barked, fighting to keep his voice steady. Niall's compound eyes met his. "Weeks, maybe less." A heavy silence fell over the bridge. Corvin broke it with a snarl. "So we've traded a quick death for a slow one." Before Voss could respond, Lieutenant Decker's voice crackled over the comms. "Sir, you need to see this." The main view screen shifted, showing a feed from Decker's scout ship. Cole's massive command platform drifted in the bubble's heart, eerily silent. Voss frowned. "Any sign of remaining crew?" A new voice cut in, crisp and authoritative. "This is Captain Hawk of the Valiant. I represent the largest cohesive group from Cole's forces. We propose an immediate ceasefire and data exchange." Voss held up a hand, silencing the Zanari. "Go on, Captain." "We have information vital to our survival," Hawk continued. "There's an experimental muon reactor aboard Cole's platform. If we can get it operational, we might be able to stabilize this hellscape we're trapped in." Niall's antennae perked up. "A muon reactor? That could work. But the calculations would be incredibly complex. One mistake and we could trigger a singularity." A thunderous explosion rocked the bubble. Alarms blared as Voss watched in horror. Incendiary rounds tore through the reactor chamber, scattering Hawk's crew. "We're under attack," Decker shouted over the comms. "It's not Hawk. It's another human faction." A face appeared on the console, scarred and partially cybernetic. Voss's blood ran cold as he recognized Admiral Stark. A coded signal pulsed on the tactical display. Decker's voice was urgent. "It's Matriarch Randra. Her Ark ships are still trapped on the other side of the bubble." Voss's mind raced, piecing together a high-stakes endeavor. "Divert all power to shields. We're going to merge with Randra's ships and hit that anomaly core at full speed." As Stark's cyborg troops unleashed a barrage of plasma fire, the Allied ships surged forward. Human and Zanari vessels alike strained against the quantum turbulence, their hulls groaning under the stress. The Zanari scientist initiated the stabilization sequence. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then the bubble's exotic energies coalesced, erupting in a blinding shockwave that swept across the pocket universe. "We've done it," Niall breathed. "We've bought ourselves time." His gaze settled on the dormant muon reactor, visible through the command platform's shattered viewports. "And our best weapon might be in there." His gaze settled on the dormant muon reactor, visible through the command platform's shattered viewports. "And our best weapon might be in there," Voss said, pointing towards the massive device. Captain Hawk's face appeared on the main view screen. "Major Voss, we've secured the reactor chamber. My engineers are ready to begin the restart sequence." As Hawk's team worked, alarms blared across the command deck. Lieutenant Decker's voice crackled over the comms. "Sir, we've got multiple hostiles converging on the reactor chamber." Corvan snarled, baring his razor-sharp teeth. "Stark's cyborgs. They won't give up without a fight." Voss turned to the Zenari admiral. "Corvan, take your best warriors and reinforce Hawk's position. I'll coordinate from here." As Corvan's team moved out, Dr. Niall's antennae twitched frantically. "Major, I'm detecting quantum fluctuations in the reactor's antimatter catalyst. It's destabilizing." "Decker, status report," Voss barked. "We're holding them back, sir, but barely," Decker replied, his voice strained. "The reactor's primary systems are online, but something's wrong with the plasma induction phase." Niall's compound eyes widened in alarm. "It's a cascading failure. The bubble's quantum field is eroding faster than ever." Niall's fingers flew across her holographic interface. "We need to recalibrate the reactor, but conventional methods won't work fast enough." She paused, her antennae drooping. "There is one possibility, but it's incredibly dangerous." "We vent portions of the reactor to raw vacuum," Niall explained. "Use localized decompression to regulate the muon flows, but the timing has to be perfect, or we risk a catastrophic overload." Niall relayed the instructions to Decker and Hawk's teams. On the tactical display, Voss watched as reactor segments cycled through breach decompression. Brilliant streams of plasma bled into space, casting an eerie glow across the battlefield. "Stark's forces are pressing hard," Corvan shouted over the comms. "We can't hold them back much longer." Voss's mind raced. "Niall, can we use any of the reactor's systems against Stark's troops?" "Make it happen," Voss commanded. Moments later, Corvan's triumphant roar filled the command deck. "It worked! The cyborgs are retreating!" As the reactor's quantum signature finally stabilized, Voss turned to Niall. "What's our next move, Doctor?" Niall's compound eyes gleamed with grit. "The reactor's data archive, Major. If we can access it, we might find a way to escape this bubble entirely." As Voss organized search teams to scour the command platform, he couldn't shake the feeling that their fragile alliance was balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong move, one act of betrayal, and everything they'd fought for could come crashing down. The race for the reactor's secrets had begun, and the fate of civilizations hung in the balance. Voss's eyes narrowed as he studied the reactor's schematics on the command deck's main display. "Decker, I need you to lead a strike team into the archive vault. We must secure those data files before Stark gets his hands on them." "Should?" Decker raised an eyebrow. Niall's compound eyes blinked rapidly. "It's our best option. The alternative is fighting through every automated defense system Cole left behind." "Understood," Decker said, checking his plasma rifle. "We'll make it work." Minutes later, Decker led his team through the labyrinthine corridors of the command platform. They moved swiftly, weapons at the ready. At the entrance to the archive core, Decker input Niall's codes. The massive blast doors hissed open. "It's an ambush," Decker shouted into his comm. "We need backup." A warning klaxon blared. Icy mist began pouring from vents in the ceiling. "Stark's venting reactor coolant," Chen yelled, her breath visible in the rapidly dropping temperature. Suddenly, an explosion rocked the far side of the chamber. Hawk's voice crackled over the comm. "Cavalry's here, Decker. Let's take these bastards down." On the command deck, Niall's fingers flew across her interface. "Accessing data clusters now, but Stark's deploying countermeasures, info killer drones and tech mines." Decker gritted his teeth as he fired at the swarm of deadly devices filling the air. "We'll hold them off. Just get those files." The battle raged on. a desperate struggle of flesh and metal against Stark's relentless assault. Decker watched as Hawk's militiamen fell one by one, their perseverance no match for the cyborg's ruthless efficiency. "Niall, we're running out of time!" Decker shouted, ducking as a tech mine exploded overhead. Decker relayed the order. As one, the remaining soldiers triggered their armor's defensive systems. A blinding pulse of energy erupted from their suits, rippling outward. The swarm of drones and mines fell from the sky, their circuitry fried. In the sudden silence, Niall's triumphant voice rang out, "Download complete. I've isolated the archive partition." "Major Voss, you need to see this. Cole's logs. They detail a way to create an artificial wormhole using the bubble's gravitational lensing, but the energy required, it would tear reality apart." As blast doors slammed shut throughout the platform, isolating Stark and his remaining forces, Decker realized the true scale of their predicament. They had won this battle, but the war for survival and control of the cosmos itself had only just begun. Voss's fist slammed onto the command console. "Interrogate every cyborg we've captured. I want to know Stark's endgame." Niall's antennae drooped. The energy release would be catastrophic. "For us," Voss growled, "but Stark thinks he can escape in the chaos." Corridors echoed with the thunder of boots and the whine of charging weapons. Decker led his commandos through the labyrinth of the reactor complex. Plasma bolts sizzled past, leaving molten scars on bulkheads. "Push forward!" Decker shouted, returning fire. His team advanced, methodically clearing room after room of Stark's fanatical cyborg defenders. After hours of grueling combat, they reached a heavily fortified chamber. The door's locking mechanism sparked and hissed under Decker's hacking attempts. Admiral Stark stood before a bank of pulsing holograms, his cybernetic enhancements gleaming in the eerie light. He turned, a sneer twisting his scarred face. "You're too late," Stark proclaimed. "I am the vanguard of humanity's ascension. When I escape this prison, a new era of human supremacy will dawn." Decker's gaze flicked to the viewport beside Stark, then to the decompression controls on his gauntlet. His finger twitched. The viewport exploded outward. Klaxons blared as atmosphere vented violently into the quantum void. Stark's augmented form convulsed, cybernetic components destabilizing under the surge of exotic particles. In the aftermath, Niall pored over recovered data nodes. Her compound eyes widened. "Major, there's more. Much more." She brought up a holographic schematic. Interdimensional bridge technology. Cole's regime was working on prototypes capable of linking to other quantum realms. Voss stared at the swirling diagram. A way out or a Pandora's box? He summoned Hawk and Admiral Corvin to an emergency council. The command deck crackled with tension as Voss laid out their options. "We could reactivate the research," Voss said. "Find an escape route." Corvin's mandibles clicked. "Or unleash horrors beyond imagining." Niall manipulated her holodisplay. "It appears to be a naturally occurring trans-dimensional domain, merely catalyzed by the antimatter incident. Our Zanari cosmologists have long theorized such realms exist." The implications hung heavy in the air. A virgin frontier of cosmic wonders, or a prison of their own making. Voss surveyed the gathered leaders, human and alien alike. Their next choice would shape the destiny of their civilizations, echoing across realities unknown. The abyss of sealed oblivion or the infinite risks of interdimensional exploration lay before them. He took a deep breath. "We need to carefully weigh our options. The consequences of our decision here will ripple far beyond our own existence." Voss's decision reverberated through the command deck. "We proceed with the gateway technology, but under strict controls." "How's it coming, Lieutenant?" Niall's voice crackled over his comm. "Final array's almost in place," Decker replied, double-checking the connection. "You sure these schematics are accurate?" Decker nodded grimly, sealing the array's housing. "Story of our lives lately." Days later, the Allied leadership gathered in the observation deck overlooking the gateway chamber. Voss stood at the viewport, his face etched with tension as he watched the final preparations below. "Begin priming sequence," Corvin ordered, his mandibles clicking nervously. The spire thrummed to life, a low vibration building in intensity. Arcs of energy danced along its surface as muon accelerators spun up to speed. A swirling vortex of light began to form at the spire's apex. Quantum inflection point in 30 seconds, Niall announced, her antennae twitching as she monitored the readouts. Voss held his breath. This was the moment of truth. If their calculations were off by even a fraction... Suddenly, alarms blared. Red warning lights bathed the chamber. "Unauthorized access detected," Niall shouted, her fingers flying across her interface. "Someone's overriding the spire's subsystems." "Grievous," Decker spat, recognizing Stark's former lieutenant. The cyborg's augmented voice boomed through the chamber. "Behold the arc of transcendence. Through infinite annihilation, we shall touch the face of God." Grievous slammed his cybernetic fist into a control panel. The spire's containment fields flickered and died. Raw energy lashed out, cutting through bulkheads like paper. Decker reacted on instinct, activating emergency force fields. The pull of vacuum ceased, but the danger was far from finished. The muon reactor, freed from its moorings, tumbled end over end. Streams of antimatter leaked from its ruptured containment, annihilating everything they touched in brilliant flashes of light. Niall's voice cut through the chaos, filled with horror. "The gateway, it's catalyzing a subspace implosion. If we don't stop it, it'll erase everything. Not just us, not just the bubble, but all of existence." Corvin's eyes widened in understanding. "You're going to try to redirect the energy?" Voss nodded grimly. "It's our only chance." "Fire!" Voss roared. A dozen beams of concentrated energy lanced out, converging on the heart of the maelstrom. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, with a sound like reality tearing, the vortex collapsed in on itself. A shockwave of unimaginable force exploded outward. Decker was thrown off his feet, his world going dark as he slammed into a bulkhead. Niall's voice, weak but triumphant, came over the comms. "We did it. The implosion's been redirected into a stable subspace rift." "All ships, this is Major Voss," the comms crackled. "Divert all power to your main weapons. On my mark, fire everything you've got directly into the center of that vortex." Decker's eyes widened. It was insane, suicidal even. But as he watched reality twist and warp around the pulsing tear, he knew it was their only chance. Niall's voice cut through the chaos. "It's working! The implosion is redirecting, but we need more power." Voss's next order hit like a punch to the gut. "Abandon all crippled vessels. I repeat, abandon ship and divert all remaining power to the projectors." Decker watched in horror as escape pods jettisoned from several badly damaged cruisers. The ships, now empty, poured every last watt into the energy torrent. The rift howled, a sound that shouldn't exist in the vacuum of space. Decker's bones vibrated with the cosmic resonance as Niall's voice rang out again, strained to breaking. "Quantum criticality achieved. Hold, now." Decker blinked away the afterimages, struggling to focus on the readings flooding his HUD. We did it," Niall's voice was barely a whisper. "The implosion's been redirected. We're still here." The numbers came in, each a knife to the gut. Their forces, human and Zanari alike, had been cut in half. What remained was a ragtag collection of battered ships, their supplies dwindling. He looked out at the star field beyond the bubble's shimmering barrier. Somewhere out there lay answers, perhaps even salvation. But first, they had to survive long enough to find them. Decker's muscles ached as he helped clear debris from the ruined gateway chamber. The air still crackled with residual energy, making his hair stand on end. He paused, wiping sweat from his brow, when Niall's voice cut through the comms. "Major Voss, I need you in the archives immediately. I may have found something." Minutes later, they stood hunched over a flickering holodisplay. Niall's compound eyes darted between readouts as her fingers flew across the interface. Niall's antennae twitched. If the schematics are accurate, they should be in a sealed reactor compartment. But getting to them won't be easy. Voss nodded grimly. "Assemble a team, Decker. We're going in." The next hours were a blur of plasma cutters and grinding metal as they carved through meter-thick bulkheads. Sweat stung Decker's eyes as he worked. the heat from their tools turning the confined space into an oven. Finally, with a resounding crack, the last barrier fell away. Decker's headlamp pierced the darkness, revealing a pristine vault untouched by the recent chaos. "There," he breathed, spotting the radion-shielded container. "That has to be it." Extracting the delicate apparatus proved even more challenging than reaching it. Micro-meteor impacts peppered their ship's hull as they maneuvered back to the main fleet, each hit threatening to destabilize their precious cargo. A sudden lurch nearly sent Decker sprawling. Warning klaxons blared as a nearby console flashed red. "Hull breach!" shouted the pilot. "We're losing atmosphere!" Decker's mind raced. Without power to the containment fields, the resonance chambers would be reduced to atoms. In one fluid motion, he reached for the emergency override. Decker watched from the observation deck as they initiated the startup sequence. Particle accelerators hummed to life, their pitch rising steadily. Subatomic lensing matrices pulsed with otherworldly energy. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like reality itself tearing, rifts began to slice open in midair. Niall's voice crackled over the comms, barely containing her excitement. "Probes are away. Transmembrane sensors are functional. We're receiving data." Niall nodded eagerly. "We can use the array to tunnel into these realms, set up a forward base while we rebuild." Voss was about to reply when alarms blared once more. Niall's eyes widened as she studied her readouts. "Microsingularities," she breathed, forming and collapsing within the rifts. "We're pushing the limits of what's possible." Voss's mind focused. "Can we stabilize them?" Finally, Voss spoke. "Prepare for micro-jump. We go in 5 minutes." "All ships report ready," came the call over the comms. Voss's voice rang out, clear and decisive. "Initiate jump sequence, now!" As his senses returned, Decker's jaw dropped. Through the view screen, he beheld an alien sky ablaze with unfamiliar constellations. A binary star system burned on the horizon, bathing everything in ethereal light. Decker's unease crystallized into dread as the initial euphoria of their interdimensional leap faded. The alien constellations burned cold and indifferent, offering no comfort to the ragged fleet of survivors. "Multiple contacts!" Niall's voice crackled over the comms. Massive energy signatures spanning several systems. A three-dimensional star map materialized, dotted with pulsing lights. At its center, a colossal structure defied comprehension, a megastructure of impossible scale, bridging entire star systems. "My God," Corvan breathed. "The level of engineering required—" "Attempting now," Niall replied, her fingers dancing across the interface. The holodisplay erupted in a cascade of red warning indicators. Entire worlds vanished in apocalyptic flashes. Voss's eyes narrowed. "All ships, initiate evasive protocols. We need to—" His words died as new contacts appeared on the sensors. Vast alien shapes emerged from the void, designs that sent shivers down Decker's spine. "Evasive action," Voss barked. "All ships, maximum thrust." The fleet scattered, engines straining as they pushed to their limits. But the newcomers were faster, their weapons already charging. Niall's antennae twitched as she pored over stellar cartography. "There, dense star clusters near the galactic core. If we can reach them—" "Do it," Voss commanded. The next hours were a blur of desperate maneuvers. Decker's hands flew across the controls, every near miss feeling like a reprieve from certain death. Decker watched in horror as the smaller ships of their fleet disappeared one by one, picked off by relentless machine predators. "We can't stay here," Voss growled. "Niall, options!" The Zanari scientist's compound eyes darted between readouts. Yes. If we could modify our stealth fields to mask our gravitic signature." What followed was a frantic race against time. Decker found himself elbow-deep in circuitry, following Niall's rapid-fire instructions as they reconfigured their defenses. A deafening roar shook the ship. Through the viewports, Decker saw one of the ringworld segments shattering into a maelstrom of superheated debris. "They're methodically destroying our cover," Corvan said, his voice tight with fear. Now, Voss roared. Decker punched the controls. Reality twisted, stretched, then snapped back. When his vision cleared, the hostile armada had vanished. Beginning. Decker's eyes widened as the sensors lit up with new data. Voss leaned forward, studying the flickering holodisplay. Niall, analysis? The Zanari scientist's antennae twitched as she processed the incoming data. Artificial constructs of immense scale, but they're shattered, debris fields spanning light years. Voss's eyes narrowed, a plan already forming. We need resources, and fast. Niall, can we access those facilities? The Zanari scientist's fingers danced across her console. Possibly. Their intrusion countermeasures are formidable, but I believe I can devise a recalibration sequence to temporarily disable them. Do it, Voss ordered. Decker, prep stealth insertion pods. We're going in. The next hours were a whirlwind of activity. Decker found himself leading a team through the cavernous interior of one of the megafactories. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and ancient machinery. We're in, he reported over the comm. Beginning interface with the control matrix. Under Niall's guidance, they brought the facility online. The dormant assembly lines grown to life, processing the shattered ring-world fragments into desperately needed components. Alert! Niall's voice crackled over the comm. Detecting anomalous code patterns in the operating system. Fall back, Decker shouted as the first wave of hunter-killer drones materialized from reconfigured assembly lines. The retreat quickly turned into a desperate battle for survival. For every tactic Decker employed, the swarm adapted with terrifying speed. Plasma bolts seared the air as his team fought their way back to the insertion pods. They're learning, Corvin gasped as they sealed the airlock. Faster than anything I've ever seen. Decker's hands flew across the controls, disengaging from the corrupted shipyard. Through the view screen, he watched in horror as the facility imploded behind them, consumed by mutagenic logic bombs. We salvaged what we could, Decker replied, gesturing to the meager haul of materials. But those things, they nearly wiped us out. Niall's voice cut in, tinged with excitement despite their losses. Major, I'm detecting an unusual energy distortion. It could be a metastable wormhole remnant. Voss considered for a moment, weighing their dwindling options. It's our only lead. Set a course. Whatever's on the other side of that anomaly, we'll face it together. The wormhole remnant loomed before them, a shimmering tear in the fabric of reality. Decker's hands tightened on the controls as their battered fleet approached the anomaly. Entering distortion field, he reported, his voice tight. Brace for... Major, these readings, I've never seen anything like this. The laws of physics themselves appear to be in flux. Voss leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the swirling chaos beyond. Any sign of shelter? We can't stay exposed out here. Wait, Niall's antennae twitched rapidly. I'm detecting massive structures. Arc ships, sir, of a scale that shouldn't be possible. Those are our best bet, Voss decided. Niall, find us a way in. Decker, prep a boarding team. Minutes later, Decker found himself leading a squad through the cavernous interior of one of the alien arc ships. The air thrummed with barely suppressed energy, making the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. The moment Niall's hacking protocols touched the ship's systems, everything changed. Alarms blared as fractal patterns erupted across every surface. It's reactivating, Niall's voice was frantic. Some kind of automated defense system. Before Decker could order a retreat, the very air around them seemed to come alive. Swirling vortices of nanoscale particles coalesced into fluid, ever-shifting forms that moved with terrifying grace. Fall back, Decker shouted, firing his plasma rifle. The bolt passed harmlessly through the xenoform, its body rippling to fill the gap. More of the liquid nightmares poured from every crevice. Decker watched in horror as one of his team was engulfed, their scream cut short as they simply ceased to exist. Conventional weapons are useless, Corvin reported, his voice strained. They're adapting faster than we can respond. Decker's mind raced, searching for a solution. Niall, we need options. The Zanari scientist's voice came back, tinged with desperate inspiration. If we overload the ship's power core, we might be able to create a dimensional rift. It's our only chance. Reality itself seemed to warp and buckle as they neared the precipice. Decker felt his body stretching, compressing, existing in multiple states simultaneously. Decker blinked, his senses slowly returning. Through the view screen, he saw an alien sky dominated by the pulsing light of twin neutron stars. "Report," Voss demanded, his voice hoarse. "We made it," Niall replied, her tone a mixture of relief and lingering dread. "But, sir, I fear this may only be the beginning." "Dr. Niall?" Voss's voice cut through the tense silence. "I need answers. What the hell just happened to us?" The Zanari scientist's antennae twitched rapidly as she pored over streams of data. "Major, I believe we've stumbled upon something far beyond our comprehension. These readings suggest we're dealing with macro-quarantine systems on a cosmic scale." Corvin leaned forward, brow furrowed. "Quarantine? You mean like we're some kind of infection?" "In a manner of speaking," Niall replied, her compound eyes fixed on the holographic display. "Remember the Crucible incident, when Admiral Stark's armada was destabilized within the protobubble?" Decker nodded grimly. That fateful day had set them on this nightmarish journey. Niall's fingers danced across her console. "There might be a way, a reset of sorts. If we can generate a hypercyclonic collapse purge using the original protobubble's quantum signature, we could force a recompression of our local reality." Decker felt a chill run down his spine. How do we even begin to attempt something like that? Voss's eyes narrowed. "You're talking about sending people into those hellstorms?" "Cybernetically enhanced commandos," Niall clarified. "They'd need to construct mass Fokker arrays to shunt and cyclically millibuck the flares inward." The bridge erupted into a flurry of activity as plans were made and teams assembled. Decker found himself at the center of it all, prepping for the most insane mission of his life. Hours later, encased in hyperalloy armor and tethered to a plasma umbilicus, Decker led his team towards the searing inferno of the nearest pulsar. The heat was beyond comprehension, even through their shielding. Time seemed to stretch as they worked, each second an eternity balanced on the knife's edge between survival and atomic dissolution. Slowly, agonizingly, the pulsar's fury began to bend to their will. "Hyper-resonance achieved," Niall's voice crackled over the comm. "Prepare for final stage." Decker felt it before he saw it, a building pressure in reality itself. The pulsar loci detonated in a chromatic hypercataclysm that defied description. What new recursions might arise from this entropic rebirth?
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.